Hi everyone, I'm Analia Quirk, and today I'm going to be talking to you about seeing the truth behind exotic animal ownership. I wanted to begin with a presentation outline to cover everything that will be talked about in this speech. I will begin with an introduction and how I was inspired by this topic, and then go on to three separate topics that really incorporate all the elements of freedom we've learned about in class. I want to begin with exotic pet ownership and its impact on the public health and safety, then transition into captivity as an inauthentic existence for the animals, and then end with how the owners themselves are imprisoned by societal values. So a little bit of an introduction. Tiger King is a Netflix limited series that has really exploded and become popular during the coronavirus pandemic. And so I thought it would be a really fun way to talk about freedom and incorporate it into a speech. For those of you who have not seen Tiger King, it's a documentary about the lives of a few zookeepers and private exotic animal owners, and really follows how rigorous it is to care for exotic animals like tigers and other big cats. It also shows a lot of exploitation of these animals in regards to profiting off cub petting and picture taking. Another thing I wanted to talk about in this introduction is the regulations on the exotic pet trade market. On a federal level, we have the Captive Wildlife Safety Act, which essentially prohibits the interstate transfer and purchasing of big cats and big cats alone. However, on a state level, we have laws ranging from the complete ban of all exotic species to no regulation at all. So we see that the enforcement of the law is limited as well as its consistency. And so that's really where we begin to see an abuse of the system. I wanted to begin with the public health and safety in regards to exotic pet ownership. In 2011, an Ohio resident set loose 54 exotic animals that he owned on his private farm before he committed suicide. Law enforcement had to come in and mandate a shoot-to-kill order, which culminated in 48 of these animals dying and only 6 of them being caught alive and transferred to the Columbus Zoo. However, it was interesting because investigations of this farm years before showed clear trademarks of animal abuse and neglect. A lot of the pens had no food, water, or shade. Many pens were so tight that the big cats could not exercise properly, and many of the animals had lesions and other injuries that were left untreated. So exotic pet ownership clearly has some issues in regards to the safety of both the animals and surrounding residents. Additionally, 75 deaths in the United States occurred between 1990 and 2011 because of exotic animals. Besides the obvious threat that exotic animals pose if improperly housed, we also see that many exotic animals carry diseases that are transmissible to humans. Between 1990 and 2011, there were 25 outbreaks of human infectious disease that were caused by the contact of visitors at animal exhibits. There were also 65 salmonella infections acquired from touching a wooden railing surrounding a Komodo dragon exhibit here at a zoo in Colorado. And the last example I wanted to mention was that 12 exotic animal handlers contracted tuberculosis from infected elephants. So on a physical level, these animals can be very dangerous, but at a greater level, we see a danger to our health in general. I wanted to tie in the public health and safety to the political philosophy that we learned about in regards to Hobbes and the social contract. When we talked about this unit, we discussed freedom as essentially the feeling of safety and security, which I think we can all appreciate right now since we live in very uncertain times where we don't really know if we're safe or not. And so exotic pet ownership essentially diminishes this feeling of safety and security for the public, just based on a physical level as well as an emotional level. And so we see this transition towards a state of nature. And obviously, it's not full out anarchy, but once you begin to diminish an individual's feeling of safety and security, you're also diminishing their freedom. And on the side of the animals, they constantly fear physical abuse, and on an emotional and psychological level are living a life that's unstimulating and human dictated. So they are limited in their freedom in that sense. In this case, this would be a time where we really should relinquish our personal freedom in order to improve society and give our Leviathan or government the power to impose further regulations. I now wanted to talk about how life in captivity is inauthentic for these animals. And so captivity really denies exotic animals the true freedom in regards to an authentic and happy life. Freedom as the preservation of authenticity is defined as the ability of an animal to live an authentic existence in which moral worth is preserved. However, exotic animals kept as pets are really denied their ability to exercise basic instincts and their purpose of hunting, mating, and playing. Behavior of captive animals like pacing and excessive grooming really indicates that they are less happy compared to their wild counterparts and therefore not free. I wanted to go into more of the philosophy of freedom in regards to the authenticity of captivity. Aristotle stated that freedom is the attainment of happiness and tyranny occurs in its absence. So as I just mentioned, captive animals are much less happy compared to wild animals. And so since we associate freedom with happiness, these animals are not free. I also looked into transhumanism because I thought it was interesting since it really emphasizes flourishing and cultural advancement. And so when applying this to the animals themselves, we see that the animals are not allowed to create these dynamic group interactions because of territory limitations and human intervention. So transhumanists, when applying that lens to the life of an animal, would say that they are not free in any sense. On the opposite side, though, I looked into the utilitarianism perspective, and so they might argue that as long as the visitors and the owner's happiness outweighs the misery of the animals as a collective, then you have succeeded in maximizing happiness and therefore maximizing freedom. Another element that I wanted to discuss was the meaning of the lives of the animals in captivity, because obviously, even though their life is not authentic, their lives still do have meaning when the alternative is death. And so this is kind of what we discussed in relation to Nozick's thought experiment with the experience machine, and this kind of parallels with the Matrix as well. And just to tie this all together, I wanted to talk about the morality aspects of the freedom in captivity. And so existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre would really argue that we have the freedom of choice, but it's inherently paired with responsibility. And the responsibility of caring for another life is a great burden, and especially for wild animals, something that we cannot fulfill, and we cannot fulfill their true happiness. So that is where we get into this morally ambiguous territory. Now I wanted to conclude with how exotic pet owners themselves are really imprisoned by societal values. As a society, we really value and project success, power, and sex appeal onto everyone really we meet and see. And this was really apparent throughout the documentary because exotic animals captivate society with this essence of alluring danger. And so throughout the documentary, we saw that visitors at Joe Exotic's GW Zoo would pay hundreds of dollars to pet tiger cubs and have their picture taken. On the upper right, businessman John Lowe would bring tiger cubs into Vegas hotel rooms to seduce women to have sex with him. And then Doc Antle on the lower right there used the opportunity to have exotic animal apprenticeships to lure young teenagers into having sex with him because they didn't want to lose the opportunity to work with big cats. Also, we see that the money obtained from a lot of these zoo operations is used to buy fancy cars, weed, methamphetamine, and most importantly, earn a reputation of success and gain respect in the big cat industry. And so, especially pertaining to Joe Exotic, he really wanted to maintain his zoo because he had a desire for power, acceptance, and love. And all these things were denied to him in his childhood. And so he really resembles how many exotic animal owners are prisoners to past emotional trauma and bullying. On the Buddhist pathway, we see that there's an emphasis on accepting that life is suffering and following a middle path between asceticism and hedonism. However, a lot of these animal owners do not accept that life is suffering and follow the right-hand path of hedonism and really striving for a lavish lifestyle because they think that their animals can essentially fill the voids in their lives while the profits they make can help them attain a lavish style, which will make them happy and free. However, you can never be truly free when you are rooting your self-worth and your pride in animals as well as money. Another aspect that I wanted to talk about is B.F. Skinner's perspective on free will. So we see that a lot of exotic animal owners are really motivated by positive reinforcement rather than illustrating free choice or free will. Exotic animal owners are rewarded by monetary gains and the happiness of visitors. A lot of these male characters were given a ton of attention by women and even sexual favors, which in the absence of these exotic animals would never occur. And social media responses continue to enhance exotic animal owners' feelings of self-esteem and narcissism. And lastly, we see that this pattern of behavior is kind of on a loop because exotic animal owners gain a lot from the response they get from the public and really feed into that. And so this positive reinforcement creates the continuation of exotic pet ownership despite how hard it is to maintain these animals, and really shows that free will is put on the back burner when you have this positive societal conditioning. So in conclusion, we see that the personal freedom of exotic pet ownership endangers public health and safety. Restraining exotic animals to a life in a cage inherently strips them of their basic freedoms. And lastly, exotic pet owners are imprisoned by their emotions and the ideals that society places upon them. Thank you guys for listening, and if you haven't already, you should check out Tiger King.